You know, it's such a perfect song that leads into this Exodus passage that I'm going to read right now, because for sure God did arise up in the pillar of fire and in the cloud. So listen, will you, with me as I continue to read Exodus 14, verses 21 through 29. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by the strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry land, the waters forming a wall on them, on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down upon the Egyptian army. He threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before, the Lord tossed the Egyptians in the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Pray with me, would you? Amazing God, that's what you are. We call upon you to arise, and here we see that you indeed arise in this passage. That you are there watching the Israelites. But this is not just a story of the Israelites, it's a story of us. So arise in us, Lord. May your Spirit come with us now and fill us so that we can learn from this passage how our lives can be changed. Because you are here with us now, in this place, at this time. It is in Christ's name we pray. Amen. So each time I read this passage, it takes me back to the original movie, The Ten Commandments. Now, how many of you read that or saw that movie? How many of you have at least seen that movie 5 times? Right. Well, I know I've seen it at least 5. I'm thinking maybe 10 times I've seen that movie. Charlton Heston, does anybody remember him? Right, the big person there. The drama of the escape from Egypt. I still envision the caravans of people. You know, they're moving along now. They're carrying everything on their backs and everything in wagons. There's children and adults and parents and grandparents are all walking together, all leaving what has been their home for years upon years. For some of them, they are leading a way of life that they've known their whole life. That's all they knew, was to be a slave in Egypt. There's Charlton Heston, he's holding up his staff then when they're getting close to the Red Sea. Can you envision that? Do you remember him doing that? He held up this rod and the seas part. And then there's this one part where his arms start to get weak. Do you remember that? Where his arms are going like this. And Aaron comes and holds up his arm for him, so that the waters stay on the walls on the side of the path. And the Israelites are hurrying up to go on this dry land to get across the Red Sea. It is a scene that's filled with drama. I can remember music are playing. It's very powerful music at this point. And then there's this mysterious, yet powerful presence of God seen in this pillar of fire and seed in the cloud. God holding back the Egyptians until all the Israelites have crossed the Red Sea, when all the Egyptian chariots are in between the walls of water. The Israelites are hurrying now. They're worried about getting across. And then Moses lets his arms down, and the water comes back to its original place, and the Egyptians meet their fate. It's all in the movie. It's a movie viewed over and over again, and it's the exact story that we just read now in Exodus. That movie got its information from Exodus. So there's so much going on in this scene that I think that we need to take a broader perspective and look at three distinct characters in this scenario. First, we have God who's fighting for the Israelites. Moses, he's giving words of encouragement. Don't be afraid, Moses says. Stand firm, Moses says. You will see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish. He's encouraging the people. And then there are the Israelites. Oh, yes. Filled with anxiety and fear. Saying to Moses, remember what we told you when we left Egypt. Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians. If we strip away the drama of the moment and look into the history of captivity and the systemic dehumanization, I think we will understand more fully how this passage is relevant to us today and speaks to us about our own personal captivities, filled with our own anxieties and fears, all connected to our own journey of faith. Let's put ourselves in the place of the Israelites for a minute. They have served as slaves for the Egyptians for years upon years upon years. They have relied on the Egyptians for their food every day, even though meager. They have relied on the Egyptians for shelter and for their very survival. It was a way of thinking, a way of living, and learning to be dependent upon the Egyptians for every aspect of their lives. In this way of living, they did not have to think about their own future, about taking their own responsibility for their well-being. They didn't have to think about that. The Egyptians told them what to do. They didn't have to think about their own life. All they had to do was do what the taskmasters told them. Now please, don't let me get by without telling you that I know their life wasn't easy. It wasn't a picnic working for the taskmasters, but they were alive and they were surviving. And Scripture tells us it was a life they were hoping to return to. If we look within the core of their being, what we discover is that the Israelites had lost a sense of their own independence, their own ability to speak on their behalf or make decisions about what they should do or what they want or what they can even hope for. They had forgotten. Life is extremely hard, yes, but it's predictable. And it counted on that predictability. They didn't have to think about anything. They just did what they were told. This exile from Egypt was a change in their whole perspective. Their way of living, their very lives were different. And instead of serving the Egyptians, now they had to learn to serve God. But first they had to find the life that was within them. The life that they had forgotten about. The life that has been stifled for so long, for so many years, they don't even remember what it was like before slavery. They had forgotten who they were, who they could trust, and to whom they belong.
It reminds me of a story I read about a woman named Tammy. She's a woman who experienced domestic abuse and sexual abuse for many, many years. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about her story. It's impossible to capture all of it in just a few words here. But Tammy says this. She says, I was abused from the age of 6 to 12. Now, I can't even imagine what that was like, what that would do to the inside of me, how that would shape how I felt about myself. I can't even imagine that. But Tammy said what happened then is every time she had a relationship, she chose another abusive relationship. So growing up, when she became an adult, she went from one abusive relationship to another abusive relationship to another abusive relationship. She didn't even know how to be healed. She didn't even know how to change what was inside of her. And she says this, and I have to tell you this, that every time I read this, my breath holds tight. She said, I deserved what I got. She said, I am the problem. Tammy says, I am the problem. I deserve what I got. 41 years, and she's saying this. 41 years old, of all these years of abuse. She says, all my fault. That's what I thought, she said. And it took her many, many years to even have a voice again. She tried to go to work, and she'd have flashbacks that would paralyze her at work, so she'd lose a job because she couldn't function. The flashbacks would come out of nowhere, and she didn't know what to do. She felt it was her fault. She was the problem. She lost who she was. She lost her voice to speak who she was. And you know, Tammy is one of 1,000 other stories of women who have experienced the same thing. Over and over again, you hear the similar stories. And I think what's important for us to know today is how it connects with the Israelites and their journey from captivity into freedom, and what it takes to accept a freedom that becomes a possibility that they can't even fathom, a freedom that leads to serving God and finding life. That's what God wants for us, to have life. The Israelites lived in an abusive environment for so many years. It was the only life they knew. A life that had become acceptable for them. They couldn't even envision a better life, a future for themselves beyond slavery. Can you imagine being in their footsteps, crossing the Red Sea? They could not fathom that Moses could lead them into freedom from oppression and domination. I believe very possibly they didn't even think that they deserved freedom. Let me go back. Let me go back and serve the Egyptians. Do you hear that in their voices? They couldn't even believe that God had a plan for them beyond the drudgery and hard labor of their present life. They kept telling Moses to let them go, but Moses was steady, and God was present in the cloud and fire. Tammy said similar things. It took her years to see that she deserved to be free, to see the light at the end of a dark tunnel of abuse. She couldn't believe that healing could occur. It took forever for her to believe it could, that the heavy burdens that she had carried could be lifted off, so she could see her future and believe in new possibilities. It took Tammy years to free her heart and mind from the captive images of the past. It took her years to believe she was strong and not weak, that she was courageous and not a coward, and that she was brave, able to accept this new freedom that she was moving into. It took Tammy many years. It took the Israelites 40 years to reach the promised land. It took them a while to learn what it is to be free people. The Israelites have just begun their own journey to envision a future free of captivity, a place where their own voices are going to be heard, where they can rise up with their own opinions, where they can have strength again. They can have courage and hope. It's going to take a while for them. They will need to find a way to serve God instead of the Egyptians, and this will take work. Hard work it will take, as the path is not easy or straight. First, they're going to need to find their own voice. They're going to need to face their fears. They're going to have to stop looking back at the chariots coming their way and see God right before them in the present. The Israelites will need to do that deep internal work of discovering in whose image they were created so they can rightfully claim their own independence. It is in that self-discovery that they're going to learn to find God in every moment, in every situation, in every time. And they're going to learn to trust God for the unknown, serve God instead of the Egyptians, and find life in their newfound freedom. So I look out at all of you, and I've actually been thinking about you as I wrote this sermon, but as I look out at all of you, I know you have stories of captivity too. Times when you can't see God in the cloud and fire. Some of you might have such tragic stories as Tammy, and some of you might even see yourself in the Israelites a little bit. But you have a story. I know you do. Maybe your story of captivity is about struggling with addictions. That happens, you know. Maybe your captivity is about relationships. Maybe you struggle with mental illness, or maybe your captivity is just not believing that God has a plan for you. Maybe you're captive to your work, working all of the time. Maybe you're captive to your past accomplishments, to others' expectations of you. Oh no, what if I fail? Maybe you're captive to material things, the need to be successful, the need to impress others. We all have stories, and you have your own story. Stories to share about struggles, about insecurities, about doubts, about struggles in the outside, and certainly those secret, hidden stories that we have inside. We're not that different than the Israelites, my friends. There have been countless times when we have not had the courage to be free, to choose freedom, to discover who we are called to be. And I think far too often we forget that God stands with us in our struggles. God stands with us in the injustices imposed upon us. One commentary said this: God still stands on the side of the unjustly downtrodden. You gotta believe this. God helps them to victory in ways that seem mysterious to both them and their oppressors. Oppressors come disguised in many shapes and forms. Some oppressions we create ourselves. And often the things that oppress us are hidden from the outside world. Maybe our family and our friends don't even know. We must never forget that God stands on our side. As we learn to serve God and God alone, we will find our freedom and our true lives. The band's going to come up now, and they're going to sing a song about a life song. So I must tell you, as we can face our oppressors, as we do the internal work that we need to do, we will find our freedom. And as we find that freedom, and there lies our true life. The victory of freedom from our oppressors is ours to claim. The Israelites had trouble doing that, but we don't. We can claim the victory of freedom because God is with us. The journey begins. Amen.